Good morning. My name is Reverend Clayton Summers. I am descended from Irish and English ancestors, but have been separated from those lands for many generations. Instead, the land I have relationship and history with is today southern Illinois. My mother's side of our family have been pseudo-nomads. My grandfather was a minister serving in Kentucky, Ohio, Michigan, Florida, North Carolina, and more. And my grandmother did likely even more ministry in her non-ordained and non-compensated roles. Both of my parents followed the call of the Spirit into ministry as well, as I have now also done. But my father's family has lived between the waters of the Mississippi, Wabash, and Ohio for at least 5 generations in various places in the region. My direct ancestors lived on the land that, while if they did not seize themselves, they certainly supported its seizure. It is the land that they have called home, and which I call home and kin. My current ministry call brought me back to this area 4 years ago at the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Illinois and Wisconsin's regional church campgrounds, the Walter Scott Camp and Learning Center. The God who called me to this place was speaking to me through the landscape, through rolling hills and clustered forests where the branches arch over the road, and the call was issued. The requisite denominational paperwork was a formality. I serve as the minister in residence and caretaker on grounds that have formed me for decades as part of the church, yes, but also as part of a larger citizenry of beings. If God is willing, I will remain a part of this land and this place for as long as I can. Like all land, it is sacred, but more so, it is the land which I am learning to know as kin, and which I seek to have know me as kin as well. And this mutual knowing is not born through minds and thoughts and theories, but through shared love. The first words I spoke after my ordination, while I presided at the table, pictured here, were in Latin. I'm a bit pretentious at times. Ubi caritas, ibi ecclesia. The translation I prefer is, where love is, there is the church. Now, love can mean different things to different people, and has been twisted to mean coercion and manipulation. But that isn't shared love. That's unidirectional. That's one way love. The church of our kin, the greater than human creation, is known through shared love. This is the church. It is not our congregational, regional, and denominational expressions of church, but among these there are bright patches that resemble it. It is not the church which created and supported the doctrine of discovery. It is certainly not known through shared love. It is not the church which then arranges humanity at the top of a hierarchy. It is rather the church in which all creation participates as an equal member, with a citizenry greater in magnitude than any empire and a depth that intersects eternity. The only street sign of this congregation is shared love. For me, learning about the doctrine of discovery has primarily impacted the way in which I tell stories. It impacted the way in which I just told you the story of who I am and how I understand the church. It impacts the way I tell stories when I play Dungeons and Dragons with my friends, when I set up fantasy worlds where barren landscapes are being sought for cultivation by powerful evil people who want to make them useful. It impacts the stories I tell myself internally, those stories without words that are still fundamental in shaping myself, those internal narratives we all tell to ourselves. So today, I'm going to keep telling stories, stories of shared love. The stories I offer you are homegrown, true, and about this church we find when we enter actually into relationships deep enough to create shared love. These are just a few of the congregations with which I have built enough relationship to hear the beginning of their stories. I'm still learning and in conversation with them. I'm hearing who they are, the continuing impact they have experienced through the doctrine of discovery, and who they could become as kin again. And I'll do my best to remind us of the personhood of our kin as well. Our first story is about the church of my neighbors, those who are being beavers. This church is a church of shared love and joy. I was delighted when this congregation moved back into my neck of the woods. Our kin comprising this congregation had been absent from before my memory of this land and the memory of at least 3 generations of my human family. In the fall of 2023, wandering along the north shore of the lake at Walter Scott, I saw the telltale signs of those who were being beavers returning to this place. The stumps of small trees and bushes scattered around the perimeter of the lake terminated at a point going skyward. What I did not know at the time was the freshness of the beaverkin's work. I wondered if they had always been here, and I simply had failed to notice, or if perhaps I had missed them, and they had already traveled elsewhere. I learned later how to tell the difference, that a graying of the wood takes time, and fresh wood, especially that which is still oozing sap like in this picture, has very recently been gnawed down. Our beaverkin are incredible in their own right. They have been constructing lodges and dams since before memory and have perfected the art in ways which we can only aspire towards. Their dams stretch up to half a mile in length in some places, but perhaps an even higher form of the art of building dams is when to let go that of which they have created. Dams can last for generations, and lodges can multiply, but as the seasons change and the landscape is altered by their presence, our neighbors who are beavers will let one dam go so they can build another. Many research papers have been written about how our beaver can detect running water, how they sense a leak in the dam, and how they navigate in murky depths without sunlight. And yet none that I have found ask what it is like to experience joy as a beaver, nor how they express a shared love. I imagine experiencing joy as a beaver must be a marvelous experience. I imagine it must be the feeling of sliding through the water, where the coating on your fur makes the resistance negligible. I imagine there is joy in hearing a gnawed tree and bush begin to creak as it gives way to gravity. I imagine there is joy in the play with other beavers. And as to expressing shared love, beavers create vast pools of water with their dams that an influx of new birds are able to call home. The birds bring aquatic food clung to their feet and feathers, which in time will multiply into a feast of reciprocity for the beavers. There's shared love evident in beaver lodges, where they live in their home for a time, but then also eventually leave it to the muskrat and mink and otter. Then after a time, the home will deteriorate from use and pass away, leaving space for a new lodge down the line. This is the shared love, and there is also shared love in beavers' artful movements in the water. A hidden performance out of sight and sunlight, only for the joy of the water which holds them in embrace the entire time. But these are answers to questions which the dominant culture and society have not asked. Instead, we ask questions that are born out of utility as a continuation of the doctrine of discovery. The church of my neighbors, those who are being beavers, were decimated by the doctrine. Fur trapping was the first wave of impact. The respect that comes with relationship was not present when the fur traders saw a quick source of cash in the beaver. They were not interested in a long-term engagement with the land and those upon it. Why learn how much population the congregation of beavers needed to sustain itself when the fur trappers had unlimited wilderness for exploitation and profit? Once the beavers were all gone from their area, they would just press onwards anyway. Along with this commodification of relationship, a common occurrence in too many congregations of either human or greater than human kin, along with this commodification of relationship came a dual destruction of indigenous human communities too. Fur trappers brought disease and violence as tools of greater exploration whenever their greed could not be satiated, when the promise of the doctrine was not fulfilled enough. Once beaver kin had been decimated over centuries, completely removed from many landscapes, Only then did the culture of the doctrine of discovery seek to help the beaver. The population was brought back from the brink, but not because the beaverkin was our kin, nor because it was an expert at the shared love and had something to teach us humans. Instead, it was brought back because it was a commodity and because there was a financial desire for beavers to do their engineering work, making their dams and changing water flows, but only where it was designated. Today, the beavers are back. Their populations have rebounded, but they are barely tolerated. The doctrine of discovery has given rise to a new form of NIMBYs. Not in my backyard, beavers. At Walter Scott, we have beavers that have returned. Several people have been concerned that they have arrived and decided to stay. There is worry they will eat all the fish in the lake. There is a worry they will fell too many trees and harm the forest. There is a worry they will block up our water overflow tube that keeps the lake level at the correct height. I wonder what these well-intentioned but relationally impoverished folks would say if they had shared love with the congregation of the beavers. Would it make a difference if through shared love they spent time enough to learn that the beavers do not eat fish, which we humans so preciously hoard? If they knew the beavers were herbivores, would they worry about their presence? If they had a relationship with the beavers, would it change their perspective to know that beavers do not take down every tree indiscriminately, and that just perhaps the landscape isn't ours to control? Would relationship with our beaver kin have informed them that their blueprints don't call for a dam over this tube? Would spending time watching the beavers with curiosity, awe, and reverence and love have made a difference? I don't think so. Not entirely, because well-intentioned folks are the product of 500 years of the doctrine, just the same as I am. It is one thing to know intellectually that the world doesn't exist for our subjugation. It is one thing to reject the doctrine of discovery cognizantly. It is another thing to release the expectations which are intertwined. It is another thing to release the expectations that we get to decide what the landscape looks like, not our kin who is being a beaver. That takes shared love. So, despite the worries of some, the Walter Scott Camp and Learning Center is becoming kin again with the Church of the Beavers. I've watched their lodge grow to 20 feet in length over the past year. They have assembled sticks, thoroughly mowed down the wetland willows here, and have dragged and stacked and packed together a home for quite a few kits. Our love is a repudiation of the doctrine of discovery, not just in words, but in actions. The land is not ours. The lake is not ours. The beavers are not ours. We are in relationship with them. And in return, the beavers have reciprocated this love. They've taught us the important things, how they experience joy and share love with the water. Our next story is about the church of my neighbor, the one who is being a lake. At Walter Scott, we have a 20 or so acre lake located smack dab in the middle of our 180 acres. It is home to bluegill, crappie, bass, beavers, snapping turtles, and a few neuter grass carps. A few water snakes live within it, herons have nested in the brush of the east end for over 2 decades, and bald eagles make daily pilgrimages from their eyries to go fishing. A family of river otters make a seasonal pilgrimage to call the lake home during the winter months. Raccoons, possums, deer, and even our goats drink gratefully from the lake on hot and cool days alike. The lake is appreciated by our campers during the summer, who set out on pedal boat, kayak, canoe, and paddleboard to just spend some time on the water. It is loved by generational fishers who have passed down the tradition of a weekend fishing trip over the decades. These are bountiful relationships of the church of my neighbor, the one who is being a lake. And yet, the church of my neighbor, who is being a lake, is not indigenous. 60 years ago, The lake was a muddy gully that cut through the middle of the forest, creating a perpetually damp trough, even in dry seasons, one that could adequately be described as a swamp. This was the path for over 1.25 square miles of land, which sent the rain that flowed off of them to follow on a journey not of being a lake, but of being a creek and then a river. The church of my neighbor, who is a muddy gully, is unknown to me. Like the Kaskaskia, the Kickapoo, and the Miami tribes, I did not know the muddy gully. But what I do know is that the doctrine of discovery is explicitly why I do not know the tribes who call this land kin, nor indigenous landscapes. The doctrine of discovery told the people of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in 1962, well-intentioned as they were, that it was their right and duty to turn a useless, muddy gully into a useful lake. One that could enjoy pleasant activities, like fishing and boating and picturesque views. The doctrine makes clear that a theology of dominion isn't only allowable, but is the expectation of good Christian faith. And so the people were faithful to the doctrine they knew, one they couldn't name, but which they lived. With bulldozers warming the planet, they deepened the gully until it was deep enough for the planned lake. They pushed the early earth into large mounds that became a 30-foot tall dam. I had a conversation with a person who was there a few years ago, who happened to be a young child at the time. He was playing off to the side while his father worked. He said that as the bulldozers went, the damp earth they pushed writhed with snakes and frogs and other creepy crawlers. He said it with a shiver of revulsion to me, and I say it to you with some sadness, for a vibrant congregation, destroyed explicitly for myself and the other children I went to camp with. The congregation of my neighbor who was being a muddy gully, I know was a congregation of shared love. You see, I've made it my job, even if not explicitly written into any paperwork, to learn about ecology and conservation. I know that wetlands and swamps and places that say damp are so much more biologically diverse than nearly any other places on land. I wonder if the indigenous landscape were present, if I might learn about the shared love snakes have when they can be in community with other snakes in great numbers. I wonder if I would have learned the shared love of mud that stays perpetually wet and the joy inherent to such a state of being. I wonder what shared love I do not even know to wonder about. This makes me sad and makes me grieve who I have never known. But my grief is not arrested by the present. I do know that despite that grief which endures, that I should look for shared love that is the church of my neighbor who is being the lake. There is shared love evident in all the other kin who call it home and in turn protect it as it sustains them. The church of my neighbors who are being river otters eat up the excess fish and help protect the waters from the diseases of overcrowding. There is shared love when youth are able to sit in silence in kayaks and canoes, watching a sunrise for a full hour, partaking in the communion of creation, drinking the cup of sunrise, and eating the bread of dawning. The lake gives love to them in this way, and the youth return it in their reverence and awe. There is shared love expressed when the lake laps against the shore and the shore absorbs that energy, accepting the prayer of life-giving boundaries in return. Shared love is expressed in the miracle of being a lake becoming ice, the good kind. Frozen water is a rarity in the chemical world, a solid who is less dense than its liquid form. If the water that is being a lake behaved like aluminum or steel or rock or frozen anything else, the frozen water would sink to the bottom, constantly piling up until the entire lake was frozen solid. Life would not be possible. You cannot have fish that survive the winter without water that continues to be a lake. If not for this compassionate act of all water that is being a lake, or river, or pond, or ocean, we would not exist. This is an invitation to shared love, one that the rest of our creation kin have gladly accepted, while those of us who are governed by the doctrine of discovery often ignore, in favor of utility which pollutes our neighbors who are being bodies of water. My human neighbors who spray their farm fields with fertilizers every year, they do so because of the doctrine of discovery and the way that it continues to hold the pin of the Farm Bill every 5 years in Congress. To get crop insurance and subsidies, you have to follow the path of dominion over the land, and you have to spray enough fertilizer that it runs off into the church of my neighbor who is being a lake. You have to put enough in that it causes blue-green algae, a cyanobacteria, that makes the lake unsafe for human and deoxygenated for my siblings who are being fish. And so, in relationship with my neighbor who is being a lake, I open their drainage valve every late fall for 14 days to let a few million gallons of water with too many nutrients become a problem instead for Ramsey Creek, and then Bishop Creek, and then the Little Wabash and the Wabash, and then the Ohio and the Mississippi, and eventually the Gulf. Myself and the church that is being a lake remain non-indigenous on this land and systemically intertwined with the doctrine of discovery. But we're both changing. You see, lakes are a part of creation. They are constantly changing just as we are constantly changing. A natural process for lakes is eutrophication and sedimentation. Over time, sediment washes into lakes, and lakes lose half their original depth within about 25 years. They get filled up by the stuff that is coming into them. Our neighbors who are being pebbles and leaves and soil become lake bottom for a time. Eventually, the church of my neighbor who is being a lake will become something else. It will not become indigenous to its place, but its descendants, those who it will become, shall. Once my human neighbors are released from the farm bill authored by the doctrine of discovery, then the church of my neighbors who are being a lake will reclaim their indigeneity. As for myself, I am becoming something else too. I am allowing the sediment of relationship with our kin to build up within me as I experience their shared love. And yet, in the sediment, there are the farm bill fertilizers of the doctrine of discovery as well. I hope I can hold on to those particles of the doctrine of discovery, like a filter, because then there will be less to pass on to my kin after me. Our last story is that of the church of my neighbor who is being the land. Land is a common word we use to describe many different things. Under the doctrine of discovery, land is property and wealth, but more importantly, power. But that is a poor description, one that impoverishes everyone involved in its construction. The church of my neighbor who is being land is vibrant. My neighbor, who the United States government says the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Illinois and Wisconsin have legal title and deed to, as well as 1/16 mineral rights, encompasses 180 acres. We've already met a few relatives of this land, those who are being beavers and those who are being lake. But there are so many more. I could spend the rest of my time today, and then Conrad's, and then Joshua's, telling you about all of these relations. But since we do only have so much time, and while I shouldn't have favorites, I do. My siblings who are pillows and cradles, you see, hold a special place within my heart. You see, most of my kin who is being land are covered with an oak hickory forest. There are some ill-advised loblolly pines in the southwest in need of restoring, but excluding the lake, over 90% of the land is forested. When a tree falls, and its roots rip out of the ground, there is a hole, a large pit left behind while decades or centuries of buried roots now stretch their way skyward. The hole is generally in a greater diameter than I am tall and has a depth that comes up to the hips. Depending on the type of tree our sibling was, if they were hardwood or softwood and varieties of those, 1 to several decades will bring decay to the trunk and eventually the roots as they become what is next to be. In their place, left behind, is a shallower pit, and the soil of the roots becomes a pillow and a cradle. This is the land and who it has always been. At times, portions of the land who was being forest were cleared by settlers to plow and to till, but they have gone back to being forest again now. The church of my neighbor who is being the land has shared love in its pillows and cradles. The cradles create basins that catch water for drinking and then slowly drain into the land to penetrate deeply into the aquifer it also holds. There is shared love expressed in the pillow's soft soil, which allows in its fertility the growth of ferns and moss and flowers like my favorite spring beauties. The church of my neighbor who is being the land shares love best, however, as faithfulness. Despite the impacts of the doctrine of discovery, which we will get into in a moment, it remains steadfast in its faithfulness to being the land. We are trained to not give the land's state of being a first thought, let alone a second thought. But like all of creation, the land is animate, and the land has a choice to be in relationship how it chooses. Despite the scars we who carry the doctrine of discovery cause, the land shares its love as faithfulness. It is incarnate in this way. Perhaps those of us who claim Christianity can see another who imitated the incarnate faithfulness of the land. But we do not often think of Christ when we think of the land. We think of property, wealth, and power because that is the core of the doctrine of discovery. Those are the prizes it offers, at least for those with the correct skin tones, religions, and birth gender. I cannot help but see the doctrine of discovery as a mark upon the kin that is being land every time I remember that we, the Christian Church disciples of Christ in Illinois and Wisconsin, as well-intentioned as we are, put the name of a white Christian evangelist male on a land he never set foot on, let alone tried to be in relationship with. Any who are truly in relationship with our kin who is being the land would never place their name upon it, because relationship is not ownership, nor a flaming brand to stamp wherever we please. I won't fully dive into Walter Scott's evangelistic ministry on the frontier as an extension of the doctrine of discovery today. It's a bit too far afield, but I assume we can all draw some obvious lines from some of our other wonderful speakers. Instead, I want to share how the doctrine of discovery, before I ever heard of it, led to me being introduced by a friend as the most liberal person I know. Even before I learned about the doctrine of discovery, I had this crazy, scripture-informed belief that maybe we aren't supposed to accumulate wealth. Maybe we're supposed to hold things in common, sharing them as a community like the early church. I didn't see the land as animate at that time as I do now. I didn't know it as kin. I held a very white belief that wilderness was separate and its preservation needed to be free from people. But I didn't and still don't believe in private property rights. So I shared this belief, what I thought was a simple biblical teaching from the early church about how we are supposed to live in community. And it led to my good friend introducing to me to others as the most liberal person I know. He doesn't believe in private property. The doctrine of discovery makes the idea that the land could have rights and responsibilities unto itself, that it shouldn't be owned, a political opinion that is beyond the spectrum of imagination in a culture defined by the doctrine of discovery, even today. So, when campers came to the church of my neighbor who was being the land, before I learned about the doctrine of discovery, I would always tell them, no, I do not own the land. We all own it together. Everyone who is a disciple in this region. I now tell them a different story. I tell them that I do not own the land. We all take care of it together. We all are to be stewards of the land. And if they're willing to go a bit deeper, I tell them we're to be in relationship with the land. I don't foresee myself undoing the system of private property, but I'm hopeful that while the land remains faithful, I may be planting seeds that can grow into such a grove that it blots out life to the system that is such in a future day. One of the best things the church has the opportunity to do in this day and age is to be in relationship with the land the U.S. government says we own. I'm proud of my region, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, Future Living Waters region, as we emerge with Michigan, for the choices that were made in our new governing documents. The merged region will have 2 campgrounds, and decisions around property sales will not start with the removed regional leaders, but with folks who walk the land and serve on the boards caring for those places. Those who have relationship with the land. For the church of my neighbor who is being land, this means it will not be primarily regarded through a lens of wealth and power. It will not be a piggy bank to break in case of fiscal emergency. And yet, the doctrine of discovery is still alive and well in the church. And even when we don't say it out loud, we acknowledge it with our actions. The advisory board for the church of my neighbor who is being the land just approved on Sunday the first step in a longer process of moving forward with a proposal to make a portion of the property a state land and water reserve. We'll still retain legal ownership and the ability to be in relationship with it in every way that we have been, but the land will be required to remain a contiguous forest. This is significant because the agreement would be regardless of who owns the land. If the deed changes hands, the reserve status remains. This also means, in the eyes of a doctrine of discovery informed society, the value of the land will plummet. It will cease being useful because it will have retained some of its own ownership. I do not think that this, I do think that this is an act of faith on part of the board. But I also think that it is an expression that they still believe the church is informed by the doctrine of discovery. They wouldn't use this language, but they believe the church as a whole, who does not have relationship with the land, who does not know it as kin, could very easily slide back to seeing it as the piggy bank the doctrine of discovery says that it is. Documents and processes could be changed. And so, ensuring the land can remain that which it wishes to be in its faithfulness, even with a government promise that especially those of us who are part of Winter Talk are want to wholeheartedly trust, was chosen as a better path forward. This tells me the doctrine of discovery is alive and well in the church, or at least in the church of our collective imaginations or shared history. But let me end this story by telling you how the church of my neighbor who is being land is doing today. Today, I and those who set foot or claw or paw or other limb appendage upon it are in better relationship with it because of our kin who are being goats. The Dominion theology, the doctrine vocally supported, led to many invasive plant species being brought onto the land. They degrade the soil, they strangle the kin who already live there, and their path to indigeneity is one that required the sacrifice of most of the rest of the indigenous kin along the way. So, in conversation with Dave and the encouragement of others, we decided to remove the invasive vegetation covering 150 acres of forest with a herd of goats. We started with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego goat. And then, via goatiplication, i.e., people asking, do you want more goats? We got Maisie, Minnie, Lupe, and Paco. Then a neighbor asked a bit later if we'd like Billy, and we said, come along. We thought that was it, but now Astrid, Freya, Frida, and Marshmallow make an even dozen. Having cared for them for nearly 3 years, I can confidently say what I expected was going to be true before we started. Goats are not the quickest nor least labor-intensive ways to clear invasive plants. They're a lot of work. You're constantly maintaining or repairing fences. I've basically become a partial veterinarian between hoof care and medical injections, and most other methods of controlling the invasive plants would have been easier. And yet goats were undoubtedly the correct choice. The goats have far more cared for me than I have cared for them. We together are an example of shared love. They are the reciprocal and relational approach. They are being a part of the land. The way poisonous chemicals could never have been in a way that expressed shared love. And so the church of my neighbor who is being land, they are healing themselves and the souls of those who enter into relationship with them. I myself will never be indigenous. I am too formed by and part of perpetuating a culture that dismisses the animacy of our neighbors, a culture that allows the poison root of the doctrine of discovery to bear the twin fruits of white supremacy and Christian nationalism to this day, and a culture that holds up the structures of the God of money instead of the God of the church of shared love. But perhaps I can live in such a way that my children, or my children's children, or my future moral descendants will someday claim a new indigeneity that echoes and honors the shared love of the church that we are walking towards. Amen. Yeah.
Oh, no, I missed hearing the warning there.
Sorry.
That was fabulous, Clayton.
Fabulous. There you go if you need it for the chat.
Thank you, Clayton. And wonderful piece. I'll just start with the one. Now I got a number of questions, but I'll go with one. I'd like to hear more of your thoughts on, you didn't put it this way, the domesticated versus the invasive.
Mm-hmm.
So gully
Yep.
to lake,
Mm-hmm.
goats to brush,
Mhm.
are some of the things that come up for me. So that domesticated invasive piece.
Yeah, yeah. I think it goes back to really what was at the core is relationship that we're able to have, right? When with the goats, are we attempting to be in relationship with them versus with the invasive plant species? Is there a way, or at least I have not, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, about, do I simply have my timelines confused by my human perception? Do I simply need to wait a few thousand years for, these plants to naturalize themselves to the area to form relationships with species of insects that will feed on them and with animals that will eat them and such? But then I also recognize, because there's nothing in all of creation that does not come with a trade-off. There is a necessary life needs other life to survive, and the cost, at least for instance, for the invasive plants, is too high. What it would cost relationally to the rest of the whole. And similar with the muddy gully and the lake, The lake is probably more, like you said, kind of domesticated. It's not necessarily something that is invasive to the land. It has come in and it has formed those relationships. Like we were talking about, it has a vibrant ecosystem that is within it. It has beavers and river otters and fish.
Thank you. Thank you, Clayton. Questions?
Along those lines,
Mhm.
that concept of ecosystem. I mean, we tend to talk about environment, which seems such, kind of, it's almost kind of lost its meaning with so much around climate change and things like that. But this idea of an ecosystem, I mean, we talk about systems and structures, but it's based on relationships.
It is. It's more like a family.
Yes, yeah. And I'm wondering if maybe even reclaiming some of that language, even within the church as an ecosystem, right? Right. I'm just.
That would play a lot into like family systems theory and such.
Yeah, I mean.
Would be, you could think of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's good and bad there.
Yeah.
But this idea in the ecosystem with that indigenous two-eyed seeing knowledge of balance, there has to be a balance for the ecosystem to work properly, right?
You can't just have, unrestricted growth of things. That's
There has to
cancer.
be a balance even in the church, right? Of respect and kindness and compassion for everything for ministries to work effectively. So anyway, that just really struck me. So thank you for bringing that forefront for me.
Yeah.
I just want to add to your workload because
Great.
with your new son, you don't have enough to do.
Okay.
Your presentation talking about the kin on the camp needs to be a children's book, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
A children's book that adults are going to read.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And number two, you need to do a camp for adults that come in and they learn all of this, but they have to live that way too. Okay, so those two things, put it on your workload.
Got it.
That was
Really good idea.
That was fabulous, and it needs to go further than here. So
I concur with both of those things.
Right.
I think the very idea when you have, and I guess my question goes to, how are you able to bring any of this into the camp experience with the campers to help build that understanding of my neighbor being a lake, my kin who are, I think that is so
I think
important.
there's a good avenue there to bring it in. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's worthwhile, and we've been talking about that already, be doing more specific focus on, communicating the place
Yeah.
to our campers.
And part of that, Davey, because it becomes so important because it's so political. That's right, because we've done so well as a nation of taking away place names and returning returning to it, right? So the idea of a natural name of Denali going back to the family. Which I would wonder, we don't need to have the conversation now. But it does push me to wonder more about the place names we put on places like and in each of our places, because I don't think this would be unusual to look at congregations across the country, and especially our camps across the country.
there is a question from online. Larry wants to know, do you have staff at the camp and how many? Volunteers, internships? What does your staff look like if you have staff?
That is a constantly flexing question. I am the only paid staff person on site. Generally, we have during our youth camps, we do a really neat program that we started called Sabbath of the Stovetop, where we invite ministers in our region to come in and to their churches to give them a week off. That is not expectation of them using vacation time or anything else, but is a way that they come in and they cook for a week, and then we give a grant to the congregation for green initiatives or children and youth ministries as a little bit of kind of reciprocating and making a circular economy in that way. And then we have our staff for our youth camps or volunteers that are wonderful volunteers that take their time to do that. yeah, I think we have volunteers that come in and do repairs and maintenance all the time. Bud's going to be back a week from today to see him again. Don't know what we're doing yet. It'll depend on the temperature.
Any questions? Yes, Bob.
I think I heard your undergraduate major last night.
Oh.
How did you move from there to where you are?
So my undergraduate major is in aerospace engineering. So very similar to what I'm doing now. I probably think far more about thermodynamics than most of our camp staff. But no, I'll tell you the short version, which is I went into aerospace engineering because I loved Star Trek. And they don't tell you that 90% of the jobs are in the military industrial complex when you go into Star Trek. They're not all exploring brand new frontiers.
Right.
So it didn't take long for me to realize once I was working for one of the big bads that I was not wanting to do that the rest of my life and that I needed something else. And I also didn't like being in a windowless gray building all day. And, you know, I came to realize that the parts of Star Trek that I loved were the internal explorations, not necessarily, the space explorations are a great setting, but I got really excited about realizing that, you know, in ministry, we're exploring frontiers also, and frontier language is problematic that Star Trek has used for a long time, but we are actually delving into and engaging with what makes us who we are. And I think that's kind of the path.
I have a question from online and I want you to think very carefully before you answer this.
Okay.
Because you may, depending on how you answer this, be recruiting a volunteer. I don't
Okay.
want to speak for Larry. Larry's going, Lori, stop. So do you have a space for a travel trailer for volunteer support?
Like a place that a travel trailer could be parked, Larry?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got
When
RV
he
sites.
he says when he retires.
Okay, yeah.
Do you have space for a volunteer to show up, bring their travel trailer and the
Yeah,
hookup?
we've got RV hookups. We've got 30 amp plug-ins and water, Larry. We don't have a sewage dump, but that's a different story. We didn't talk about my neighbor who is being lagooned. That's a different saga.
Yeah, I mean, we're against the doctrine of discovery, but if you could have some electricity.
Yeah. It's kind of like Crow talked about yesterday, you know.
Some basic things.
We can enjoy some things.
Right. We can't wait for you to go, Larry.
I remember years ago, maybe 20, 25 years ago, when Camp Walter Scott was being looked at as a piggy bank that need to be smashed in order to save the region at a certain point. And people were, I mean, many regions go through this. We're so emotional about our camps, not so much about, because so many people have particular emotional ties to a camp experience, not so much about the land and the way we're talking about. So how did the region move to this idea of reserve, and were you part of any of those conversations?
Like the nature reserve.
Yeah,
I will say that's still in progress. So we've gone through so we initiated that at the advisory board level. That will now go to the regional church council in March for conversation. But seeing as Camp Crystal just did the same thing back in October, they actually got paid for theirs, which was very nice.
that's the one in Michigan.
So that I helped initiate that. One of our elders in the Disciple Church in Champaign also happens to be the retired environmental law chair at the University of Illinois. Trifocal. I've got one of his books with me. And so he came down and visited for, 30 minutes one day and mentioned like 5 things that were all wonderful ideas and was on his way. And I was like, yeah, we should definitely do this.
Great.
We'll talk about green burial a different day, but that's in the future also.
Wow.
Yeah, Walter Scott, the region was on that brink.
Yeah.
Teresa Delia Parker first became regional minister.
He inherited a lot of a mess.
And Larry inherited the huge, I remember regional assemblies that were just absolutely fraught with tension, and the fact that that has subsided, and it's that people like you are there taking care of the camp. It's kind of it's a good thing to see. But I'm so excited about the potential of what this idea of indigeneity can do, and just being aware of the impact of the doctrine of discovery. So the way you framed everything was just really so helpful. And I think, again, we got to figure out, this is our work, right? As a group to get more of this out. But I think in the region, so if there's any way I can help in Illinois, so just let me know.
Thank you, Terry.
This would be a great presentation for all of the regional ministries.
That's what I was just thinking.
And especially if you do record it.
Yep.
Yeah.
It would be something you could even offer.
Right.
Yeah.
Everybody's wrestling with the camps.
Yeah, it's,
So
That's
people
what
need
I
to
was
have,
thinking.
they need to have a new frame to
And
look at the whole thing.
I'm leading the creation care retreat at Camp Caroline here at the end of the month. And I will be using somewhat similar lenses
And
to.
what's it, the Association for Outdoor Ministries?
So,
That group.
meet on Zoom once a month.
You know, and I wonder, instead of, looking at our camps as a commodity line item, where anybody can just go, oh, camp, then bring the money over here to save something. If everyone could look at their camps as, even if they don't use their camp anymore, as a refuge.
Exactly.
What would that be? We'd have we've got a lot of camps.
We've got about 30 in the denomination in the US and Canada
Yeah,
currently.
and unfortunately, in Washington State, we lost a camp.
Mhm.
So now we have one camp, but to save that one camp and say, okay, and that one camp is like on property that's like, oh my gosh, I can't even tell you how much it's worth.
Mhm.
But to save that, just that idea of saving that, and making it a reserve, even if you never step foot on it again, it's worth the value of saving it into green space or just space that can be left alone.
Couldn't agree more.
We could start a movement, right?
Yeah, I think,
Thank you, Clayton.
Thank you.